Ladies and gentlemen, as I say, thank you for my introduction. Just a bit of background on myself. I'm from Arcadis, formerly IBI Group. We were acquired, I think, about 18 months ago, so we're in that glacial transition into that company. So you'll see us under both brands occasionally still. There's a bit of lag there, but in principle, we're all Arcadis now. I have a background in remote sensing, and this led me sort of unexpectedly to work mostly in asset management. So information management is my primary background, and we've been doing work on or for national highways primarily, other transport authorities, some MOD, some other areas. Again, basically looking at their entire raft of asset information in the round. So you've got everything from your kind of standards and requirements and your policy through obviously enacting process, having data and systems and skills to go with it, and then wrapping up in the governance to do with that. So yeah, quite a dry topic here, I'm afraid. I think this might be the least exciting one you see today, because again, it's much less about the surveying itself and the flying of drones and the exciting technical aspect. It's really about the boring data stuff and rule sets that go behind it. That's my specialty. This is the face that goes with it. We do, as ever, have our drones panel questions. So again, throughout, if you want to grab that and pick that up. We don't? All right, doesn't matter. Yep, here we go. So yeah, as I said, I've just outlined kind of the background here. I'll skip over that again. Say the framing is national highways, but I think this applies across the board. So hopefully there's some interest here, and kind of what we're looking to get really is an understanding of what your experience is. I'm saying how we've done something and what our experience is, but I'm really interested in the wider industry, the wider community here. So in terms of structure, I'm just going to talk through survey challenges, how we see kind of a problem, how survey standards are the intended solution, and then a quick view of the landscape of these within national highways. So again, essentially what they have today, if it's interesting or relevant to anyone. So there are two core problems as we see it with undertaking these surveys. The first one is obviously from the commissioning point of view, it's getting the data you want. We know that the survey industry is very broad. We know that with the advent of drone technology in the last sort of 5 or so years, it's really exploded. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity to get surveys done. You have these applications. We know they're flexible. We know they're safer, which is a massive highlight for national highways. And we know they can be more economical, and they can provide new use cases. And there's this growing idea that these non-technical users have an interest. That's one of the critical factors here. It's not just the most data-centric or the most survey-centric people. It's wider within the business, and you've got this idea that people have a grasp that they can use this information, but it's that relationship between what they need and what they want out of it. Imagery and point clouds are your most prevalent. Anyone can view a picture, you can get something from that, but on face value, that appears simple. Anyone can see something and take an interpretation, but really in the detail of that, what you can and can't decide from an image or a point cloud data set has a lot to do with the specification of that data. So you might infer information that isn't reliable depending on the quality, the resolution, the spatial accuracy, exactly what information was involved. So we see this challenge where there's a lot of drone operators, there's a lot of survey providers, but they're not necessarily always experienced in that definition of data or those data sets. So instructing partners, subcontractors, and suppliers is an issue, and obviously validating you've got the data you want. When it's been provided, you want to be sure it's exactly what you needed, it meets the quality. So that's your first half from the commissioning kind of point of view. There's then a down the road effect. So again, with this long-standing increase in use of survey data, you've got more data than ever, and we know that historical data kind of piles up and accumulates within the business. This costs money to acquire in the first place. It costs money to keep and maintain. So it should be reused, but it needs to be reliable and it needs to be relevant. And again, imagery and point cloud, huge data sets, many, many terabytes, but they require this extra context to be useful. So your challenge is there, the existing data you have, someone may have commissioned the survey more than 12 months earlier for a different purpose. But what can you use that data for? Is it something you can understand? Can it be trusted is a key factor. So with these two challenges and issues as we perceive them, your solution is ironically, I appreciate, even more information. You have all this data. What do you need? You need more data. You need information about the data you have. But that needs to be in a kind of framework approach. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be structured. There needs to be a way of communicating and understanding this so that you have data and you have information or metadata about it that will explain what you've got, when it's from, who got it, that kind of thing. So you can see this kind of short list here. Again, this is a high level. There's obviously a lot of detail in some of these categories. But in terms of, you need to understand what data you have, where was it captured, when was it captured, what methodology was used. And again, that can be down in the granular elements. So not just, is it imagery, is it LiDAR, for example, but what equipment was used, that kind of thing. Because down the road, you could find, a flagged warning from the industry saying this equipment was then actually prone to an error or had an innate issue. There could be a recall, that kind of thing. You need to know which data sets were associated with that. Obviously, your data specification is really in the detail, what resolution, what location, what spatial systems and such. Data quality, and then potentially rules for data management, although that's very organization specific often. And I've drawn this kind of loose matrix board here as a bit of a pin the tail on the donkey almost exercise. We don't have to go through the full thing, but you can see how you have different players here on the left. So this could be the commissioning organization themselves. You could have the survey provider, or you could have an external such as a regulatory body, CAA as such. And some of this comes from before the survey, and some of this is understood after the survey. So your specification might have a lot of stuff from the commissioner. We need this imagery, this resolution, this location. But we don't care what equipment you use. That is something we want to know, but it's something you know after the fact. So within this, you've got the before and the after, and you've got this kind of landscape. So really, what am I talking about here? Well, it's this idea that you have survey standards. You have a standard that defines all of this, lays out a structured way of articulating how you describe your requirement, how you fulfill that requirement, and what information you provide with the data products at the end of it. So you can see all these benefits around the world. It's driving consistency, help those non-technical users, obviously ensure clear communication. My formatting has been balked here. Enforce safety again. Obviously provide that quality framework so you can measure whether or not the data is up to the requirement. From the provider's point of view, and I believe there's plenty of you here, it's ensuring your deliverables are validated and meet the client's needs. And then obviously I say it's that ongoing context. So all data that you've stored or retained or acquired or shared comes with this certification or specification that says what it's about. So I'll talk briefly about what we've been doing. Arcadis have been supporting national highways, as we say. We're looking at the development of a suite of survey standards. So I'll bore you very briefly if any of you aren't familiar and have any interest. Standards for Highways covers a couple of aspects of formal documents that apply to national highways and the other highways authorities in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. You have Manual of Contract Documents for Highways, MCHW. That's mainly construct. So again, that doesn't strictly apply to what we're talking about here. You have DMRB, which is Design Manual for Road and Bridges, and that's your design and maintain aspects. Now, traditionally, this was how you have the engineering level maintenance of things. But as technology's evolved and so on, this now includes operational stuff like survey specifications and scopes. So we've been working to develop these documents. There is a very formalized process for this. There is a standard within the DMRB, which is itself a standard for how you write DMRB documents. It's wonderfully self-referential, horrible. It's called the MDD. This is really just to highlight that there's a breadth of engagement. We do a lot of work with stakeholders across National Highways business, but also we do try and pull in knowledge from industry partners, suppliers, other kind of groups that have an interest in surveying, GIS, spatial, etc. So there's this list of kind of consultation targets that you can bring in for this formalized process of basically informing and ratifying the standard before it's published. And all the standards go through various updates. So approximately annually, there's an opportunity to basically kick back and say, we need some changes either from a technical aspect or just in line with ongoing practice. So for a quick view of what we've achieved to date, basically, this is a handful of standards. You'll notice this numbering convention, GG951, etc. That's the DMRB coding convention. So the letters and the numbers all line into a series. So previously we worked on structure, and again, I'd be interested in anyone's opinion on this. This is the way we approach this. We have this overarching document, GG951 at the top here, which really applies to geomatical surveys as a whole. So this is everything you need to do regardless of what kind of survey you're undertaking. So it doesn't matter if you're flying a drone or not. You could be doing mobile mapping, you could be terrestrial scanning. Principally, you could take satellite or aerial, fixed wing, whatever it may be. But you are doing a survey of some kind. So you have requirements for that. Define your area, define your purpose, get all your relevant permissions and so on, understand the project. Then below that, we have 2 to-date child documents. So there's one for topographical surveys that we previously wrote, and the new one, as I say, is for imagery and point cloud data products. So that's much more related to the kind of surveying that I'm sure you're interested in the drone space. So this new one, I say, it doesn't have a number yet. We're calling it 95X because it's pending. So that's your new definition for this kind of thing. And the key thing is these interact. So it's kind of a new precedent for these kind of standards where you can't use them in isolation. You have to apply the overarching standard, and then you sort of plug and play, depending on what kind of survey you're undertaking, you apply the child document specific to your techniques or your data types. And there are likely to be more of these depending on how far National Highways wants to go. So hypothetically, you could have ones for different survey applications such as thermal imagery or hyperspectral imagery, should there be enough appetite for the business to define them. Again, something being looked at potentially. So yeah, that's your kind of your landscape. The only additional to comment on is there's one on drone operations. And again, this is very specific to National Highways. It's a governance procedure. So it's less about undertaking the survey. It's all about the paperwork that you have to do to fly drones for or on their behalf. So I think it's worth mentioning that sits in parallel. Finally to note, I think with the advent of this new standard that's being drafted, there is a pending update on the other 2. They were published a few years ago, 3 years ago, I think now, 4 years ago. But now they are due for both a technical update and a structural update to keep these all aligning as we add content, and these new child documents helps us reflect on exactly how this library of guidance and advice needs to be defined. So we are in the process, we should be updating those in the coming months. So in principle, by the end of the year, there'll be a publication of all 3 of these, now all synced up to a new suite with the opportunity for more in future. So, as I say, not the most exciting in terms of tech, bit of a story in terms of how we see the additional kind of guidance and requirement around this to make sure everyone gets to do what they want properly. And obviously the customer at the end of the day gets what they need, gets the most value. In terms of interaction here, there is an opportunity to register for future interest. If anyone is interested in onward sessions related to, as I say, we're developing these standards further, there will be obviously updates as those 2 standards that I've mentioned, in addition to this imagery and point cloud one come through. So if there's further interest, please let us know online. It's a very quick, small survey, register your contact details, register, what part of the industry you're from kind of thing. And we could potentially have a follow-on session as these standards come out, some kind of webinar or something like that if it suits. In terms of questions, I think Tony can flip me over, but I think I'm hoping to kind of engage you with these kind of feedback almost, does this resonate with any of you? Does that all sound mad? Is it overkill? Obviously that's specifically for National Highways and they need these standards to govern their behavior. But is that something that's you see elsewhere in the industry with other players? Is it something that's missing? Do you have other requirements that you follow, other standards? I know there is guidance from things like RICS, but it's maybe not quite as robust, shall we say, for this. So yeah, happy to open the floor if anyone wants to shout out. Thank you.
So we've got 5 minutes of questions. Standards is something that Commit to Drones has been a challenge for us right from the beginning. We actually turn away a lot more drone pilot applicants than we actually take on, basically because people come and they just pass their CAA test, and they then say they're a surveyor, and that's a threat to us all because there is no standard there. So how does the person procuring the service know if you're a good or a bad provider? And that's been really. I hope that really resonates with you, and it really is a problem issue. And it's something that we're looking to address. We're looking to get a work group together to address it. We're looking to work with one of the survey associations. We're in negotiations with them at the moment. We have Costain, Jacobs, and Skanska providing the core group to set how we're going to tackle that. And then with the survey association, we'll look at how we can actually do it. We want you to come on board, help people like Arcadis, help us write the standards, so you can show how good you are, rather than trying to compete with somebody who's done 4 weddings and a funeral. Like I say. So please do take this QR code. Please do fill it in. We'll run webinars. You know, we'll try and get something out there which resonates with all of you and everything. So yeah, questions please. Sorry, Jim had one first.
Yeah, I think it'd be worth getting CA involved with this as well, because certainly from our point of view as wind farm developers, one of the things that we are finding is we're having to survey new sites and existing sites, but the challenge is we're having to not only survey the topography but also against the interim flight procedures of it to try and work out what we can squeeze in terms of turbine heights, things like that. So to have some kind of agreed standard for that would be fantastic. So I think getting some like an organisation CA involved with this I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, so obviously through that final standard drone operations aspect, we're heavily leaning on their existing standards, basically pulling through. So there is that connection, but I think you're right, there needs to be more actual active engagement, so we have a conversation as opposed to just aping their rules.
So I think there's 2 aspects to that. There's the drone operation side of it, which is one, but there's also the CA standard side from the interim flight procedure assessment piece from that department within CA. So it's how getting CA to agree to the standards, so that when we as developers are getting these surveys done, they're accepted by CAA. And the NSPs as well. So I think there's 2 parts to that, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's worth taking forward. Yeah.
Well, I think we talked about trying to get the CA involved in Mixed Drones. So
yes.
If we want to speak to them and you want to speak to them and everybody else wants to speak to them, we've all got that opportunity to come together and they'll probably listen to us a bit more if there's more of us.
I'll say I think who would be the best person to speak to some of the rules and procedures.
Craig's quite. Well, we can talk about it in the panel session, but Craig's reaching out through government for us to. Craig, from PwC.
I also have a question or a point as well. So we've done this is very exciting stuff, very important work. Okay, we've done this work for a very large infrastructure company, and one thing that you didn't mention, which I think is really key. So data multi-use, how something can be used by lots of people, is very important. And so you have a standard per use case. Yeah, so that's really quite critical. So the GSD, the accuracy requirements, actually that varies by use case, and so for data multi-use, you want to get the Goldilocks. Just right standard.
Yeah.
Sorry, consultant curse there. And so yeah, I think it's really important to have standards 100%, so data can be used ways, multiple different functions, but also you can pick your suppliers on that basis of capability. As Tony said, and I can really feel the pain there because we buy a lot of drone services, lots of survey services, and not every single drone service provider actually knows even what a checkpoint is, let alone have a actually.
Yeah.
So that's really key, and the standards help you read that out. But yeah, the main point is this is really important work, and doing it by use case is critical to get most use out of the data.
So I should clarify then, in terms of national highways, these standards to date are around defining that framework for developing and delivering the specification. They are not particularly concerned with what specification that is. So in terms of things like minimum quality for a use case, that is essentially flexible on a case-by-case basis. Because we know there's such a myriad of use cases across the business, it's very hard to pin down saying you all have to meet this as an absolute minimum. Potentially that's something we could introduce in future, but I think you're right, it should actually go hand in hand with maybe not a full DMRB standard, but something that's more of a guidance and advice, so a catalogue of example use cases saying, well, if you're doing this kind of engineering work, you probably need a survey up to this specification, and it's almost an out-of-the-box model example, as you say. Together, those would form that. I think, obviously, Tony, we've talked about in the past the potential of something like that being developed with C2D. Again, it's something that National Highways, I know, have spoken about in the past. Your colleagues, Stuart and Callum, have mentioned this. So I think you're right. I think it's a missing piece of the puzzle that this is the foundation for, and then from that, I think we could go that step further and have those more defined, understandable kind of interpretations of it.
I think also foundations of it for the sorry. Yeah.
We've just run out of time. We've got a couple more questions. Is that all right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that all right? Sorry.
Yes, Robert again. It's interesting. I'm a consumer of drone data because I commission it from people, not in this context, but It's for city modelling, and it's it's sort of oblique and nadir, but it is really interesting how I think there's sort of a culture, and the nearest thing I can think of to the spec that you're talking about is the Historic England spec for metric surveys, heritage assets. The interesting thing about that is you go and talk to somebody like Church Estates, and they'll just go, "No, we're not using you." If you've not done it before, I think there's a culture in the survey community of thinking they know best. And if you to go back to my data sets, the guy that does most of my flying, I know he will fly at 60 metres, and I know he'll fly at a speed which at 1/800th of a second, the pixels won't be blurred.
Yeah.
That's critical for me, absolutely critical. And I think culturally it's quite interesting because talk to other surveyor and they'll go, no, you don't need to tell us all. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is like a springboard for that. As we say, a big part is empowering the commissioner to better understand. They won't be fully qualified as surveyors. They're not going to have decades of experience, but it lays out, say, that framework of information so they start to know what conversation they need to have with their supplier. They start to have levers to pull in terms of a technical spec where they can double check, what altitude are you flying at? Or what speed are we doing? Is that going to work? It doesn't solve the problem entirely. It's not a perfect knowledge transfer, but it builds that foundation to give this understanding. Yeah.
The other comment or question I was going to ask is, if you look at photogrammetry particularly, which is what I do most of, there's an interesting sort of zone which I think, and I'll give you an example of that, is pre-processing of images before we put them into this photogrammetry package, which I think the atmosphere on LinkedIn, for example, is that knowledge is business IP, when it really isn't most of the time. And I think from the perspective of getting the best data that you can, working out where the boundary between what really is innovation and business IP and what is just good practice lies, because you want, in a sense, I would urge you to put more in if you're going for the sort of Historic England type spec, which is, it's the best spec that I know of, because it's very, very clear about repeatability, about GSD, about laser scanning, everything.
Sorry, we're kind of...
Yeah, anyway.
No. Interesting points.
So, as the construction industry, we generally like lots of standards, but like the CSCS card standardised safety in one place, and we've got like new common standard for procurements, rather than each big body like Highways England and aviation and everything else coming up with their own. Is there anybody doing like there was a PAS standard that was brought out for utilities that standardised, or as you said, you've got RICS for surveying. Is there a common standard that is being produced rather than having it by sector specific?
Not at the present time, but that's why good drones is quite good, because it has people like National Highways in it, HS2, National Grid, Scottish Power, HS2, and those kind of people, so we can bring them all together. We can try and get that one standard, because like you're quite right, everybody's going off and doing.
Yeah, you'll reach a different standard for everything. I mean, I used to work at Gatwick Airport, and obviously drones and aviation, two different things. They don't particularly like drones going around the airport, so it's understanding what different sectors need. But no, I was just wondering, because if they could just give an abbreviation of I want this type of survey, and the whole industry knows that the spec is related to that, I think that would be a bit of a game changer.
That is the goal. That's why we're setting up that work group. We'd like you to be involved in. Yeah. So we're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we have Shell coming back with Drone in a Box and with Patrick at Sky, which is great technology. About 8 minutes before the next one, so please do come back.